Just over 10 years ago, I was fresh out of college and had moved back to my parents' house for the free rent/food for 9 months, before I was leaving the state for graduate school. To earn some scratch, I took a part-time gig doing some light bookkeeping for a small business owner guy that my dad knew. They had a business where you could rent low-level farm equipment, a small mom-and-pop type thing in the sticks. Since they knew my family, they trusted me to go in there for about 15 to 20 hours a week and check and file the rental forms, make sure nobody missed a payment date, answer an email or two discussing prices/availability, etc. Super easy gig. The old building where I worked was about 90 years old and at the top of this little hill. The downstairs used to be an old country bar until the 1970s. I could work any hours I wanted to as long as the work got done, so I'd usually go in after 7 p.m. and stay until around midnight or 1 a.m., since I knew I'd be alone and could listen to music loud and take my time. The office was on the second floor of the building and looked out onto the long driveway. One night during winter, it had snowed a few inches, but I was desperate to get out of the house, so I went into work at about 8 p.m. I always left the gate open at the bottom of the hill, since, believe me when I say that, nobody ever showed up at night. We were literally in the middle of nowhere. To even turn onto our short road, you had to only be coming to our specific building and know it was there beforehand. So I was jamming away to some Fallout Boy, everyone makes mistakes when they're young, and having some coffee, and I kept glancing at the snow outside as I worked, since our one orange street light reflected onto the ground at the gate and was causing the light to shine off the snow in a really cool, dare I say beautiful, way. Around midnight I went downstairs to do my bathroom business, then came back upstairs and got settled back into my work. I probably did about 5 minutes of work, when I glanced outside and saw a huge imprint of something in the fresh snow just below the orange light. It seemed like a huge dog or substantial animal had just rolled around on the ground there on its back or something. Since I didn't notice it just 15 minutes before, it had to have happened while I was in the bathroom. I shook it off and assumed an animal was attracted to the light or something. At around 2 a.m. I was leaving and got out of my car to lock the gate, and to be honest, I had pretty much forgotten about the imprint in the snow. But when I looked down, I was shocked to see that it wasn't just some disturbed snow, but it was undeniably the imprint of a human-made snow angel. I used to make snow angels when I was a kid, and they are also very recognizable, so I 100% knew for sure that's what this was. And it was deliberately made underneath the light post. But it wasn't from a kid, it was from a very large person. And I already knew, whoever had made this snow angel could easily have looked up and have seen me through that window, so they must have waited for me to head downstairs to the bathroom to make this angel. No cars had pulled up to our building, I would have seen/heard them, even from the bathroom, so I glanced around for footprints in the snow and saw that there was one set that led to the nearby woods to the right of the building. It was clear the person didn't use the road, but instead came from the opposite side, which instantly made me uneasy, since that side was just trees and darkness for miles and miles. By now, I was freaking out and trying to get back in my SUV. And that's when I heard it. Before I could get inside, I heard loud, high-pitched laughing coming from the woods. It almost sounded like a fake laugh, like the Witch and the Wizard of Oz, like someone was doing it fake on purpose. It was close enough that I knew they could see me, but I couldn't see them at all, since other than the street light I was under, there was no illumination. After a few seconds of laughing, they stopped. And then it was just silence everywhere, except for my heart beating through my ears. Then, the laughing started again, though louder this time, more like screaming and laughing combined. I sort of froze for like 5 seconds, listening in a panic. Now, I spent a lot of time in that area, and I know what coyotes and foxes sound like at night with their high-pitched screeches during mating season, but this was very human. It felt like it was an adult man trying to emulate a woman laughing, like someone was deliberately trying to make a fake scary shriek laugh in order to scare someone. Well, it fucking worked. After 5 seconds, I immediately filled up with adrenaline, got in my car and drove the hell away from there as fast I could without sliding off the road. I worked there another 6 weeks or so and never had a single issue, though I knew where my boss kept his gun, and I always made sure it was there when I started my shift. And I certainly always locked the gate from then on.
I went to a small college for women tucked away in a quaint New England town. In my second year, I was lucky to get a spot in one of the oldest dorms on campus, a stone building that students called the Castle, covered in gargoyles and ivy and twisting turrets. It was built in the early 1800s. The rooms themselves had been modernized, but it still felt like living in a Gothic fever dream. As a 19-year-old romantic, I absolutely loved it. I was surprised to get a room in the castle. When it was my turn to pick, and I saw that room available, I thought I had really lucked out. It was the smallest room in the building, but I still grabbed it without hesitating. I moved in the following September, and things were going great, at first. I loved my classes, and I had made good friends in my first year. But within a few weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was on a downward spiral. Sometimes I sat in my room and just cried for no reason. I thought about how hopeless my life was, that I was never going to make anything of myself. Part of me knew that none of this made any sense. I was a straight-A student at a good college, had family and friends that supported me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was doomed. Whenever I went to class or hung out with friends on campus, I felt better. But every night when I got back to my room, the sadness would eat away at me. Soon I became convinced that my outside life was just distracting me from the true hopelessness of my situation. I began turning down my friends' invitations, just to stay in my room and cry. I skipped class to sleep. I was in so much mental pain, I even started to self-harm by cutting. I had never done this before. It may sound hard to believe, but when I was in this room, there was no way to convince me that my feelings of hopelessness weren't valid. I was doomed. I knew it in the depths of my soul. My friends noticed how bad things had gotten and gently suggested that I should visit counseling services. I refused, until one day, something happened that convinced me to get help. I was sitting on the bed in my dorm room, trying to study. Instead, I couldn't stop crying. The pain inside me was so great, I was tempted to self-harm by cutting, just to make the inner turmoil stop for a moment. I closed my eyes and suddenly, with great clarity, saw a girl sitting on the bed in front of me. She had brown hair that hung to her waist, and she was looking down at something, so I couldn't see her face. Then her eyes shot up toward me. She was crying and snarling all at once, the nastiest face I've ever seen a human make. Her arms were covered in blood. I had an overpowering feeling that she wanted me dead. I opened my eyes and sprung out of bed. A heavy mood hung over the room. The bed was empty, but I could tell she was still there. I had never believed in demons or evil spirits, but this was a feeling of absolute hatred that I can only describe as pure evil. I left my room and went to the RA. Suddenly, I knew that I had to talk about how I'd been feeling. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I told my RA about the depression and hopelessness and self-harm. Talking to someone lifted a weight that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. But I didn't mention the ghost girl on my bed. When I stopped talking, I expected the RA to send me straight for counseling, which I did end up doing, eventually. Instead, she asked if I knew about the history of that room. She didn't want to scare me by telling me before, but, given what was happening, I had a right to know. Way back in the early 1800s, the college had a program for students from low-income families. They could attend the college for free, but they had to work as servants to the richer kids. My room was reserved for students in this program. One year, the girl who lived there was relentlessly bullied by her richer classmates, whom she was forced to serve as a maid. The stress got to be too much, and she flunked out of her classes. When the college asked her to withdraw, she slit her wrists in her dorm room bed, dying by suicide. I stayed with a friend until student life could find me another room. As soon as I left, the depression lifted. And to this day, I'm convinced that if I had stayed, I would not have made it out alive.